So did you ever see the movie Bug's Life?
Yes, I did.
Do you remember the praying mantis used to go transformation?
Yes.
That's what today's episode's all about.
Oh, well, now I'm really excited.
Ooh.
So he's Chris and I'm Jeff. We're the Bible guys.
So we were handed some quotes.
Yes.
People just, made comments on YouTube.
Yeah.
Our YouTube listeners, and they just took a moment and they just, put some comments in the sections there. And
neither one of these are from our moms.
No.
Which I thought our moms were our only listeners.
Right. No.
So I don't know. Are the producers, are they just making stuff up now?
We have this many listeners.
Bob Johnson says. Yeah. So, no, but hey, how cool is it? We actually, we're making jokes. So many people are so nice.
Yeah,
they send
for
in
sure.
so many nice comments.
For sure.
And only a few rude ones about you, but we don't need to read those on here.
Right. Well, they actually get the names mixed up. They were meaning you.
Exactly.
So this first one's from Judy, and she wrote in and she said, "Have not missed a message yet. Loved HC Daily, and now the Bible guys."
Oh, Judy, that's so nice.
Yeah, and I actually know Judy, and
Oh, yeah.
she calls me her second son. Her other son, and so she's my second mom. Well, she's technically my third mom because I have my mother-in-law too. Mm-hmm. So
how nice is that?
Yes.
So we are still in the theme of moms, thinking that you're amazing.
Yes, that's
okay,
right. So
okay.
it's sort of like my mom.
Yeah. Okay.
You want to read the other one?
Sure. So Christina P. says, "My happiest moments in my week are sharing church, God, and the Bible with my children. My 3-year-old just absolutely, my 3-year, I think is my 3-year-old. Isn't that what it says?
Yeah, I think so.
My 3-year-old just absolutely loves coming to church on Sundays. He just said to me, 'Mama, Jeff, Chris on. They have crosses over their heads. I noticed you referred to the woodwork behind you on the wall.'"
Right. So crosses over our heads right here. That's pretty funny, isn't it?
Yeah, hey, this clever little kid.
Yeah, that's great.
So we are nailing the 3-year-old demographic.
Yes.
Just killing it.
Just killing it.
That's right.
Well, that's actually pretty sweet.
Isn't that neat?
Jeff, Chris on.
Yeah. Isn't that fun?
Yeah,
Good.
I think that there's nothing more heartwarming. Sometimes somebody will tell me, they'll have like an infant or a baby, like a 1-year-old, 2-year-old, and they'll say, "Believe it or not, whenever your voice is on, they pay attention or they're calm." And I thought to myself, man, that is just incredibly complimentary, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, the children love Jesus too. Kids know.
Kids know.
Kids know.
That's right.
So that's special. You and I and our wives, we went over to Jade's house. Hi, Jade.
Yes.
And I had dinner, and she's always so sweet and nice. She's 9, 10 years old. I just ran into a little girl at a restaurant last week. Her name's Tessa, and she told me she listens to our podcast all the time. So it's neat, when you know that kids are paying attention and learning. And so that's fantastic. I think it's great. Hey, we've got another one. Whoops. What just happened? I just lost it on my phone. It says, from David W. says, "Hello, Pastor Jeff and Chris. First off, I love listening to the podcast daily. It starts my day off every morning." And then he goes on and he asks a really long question that I'm going to make you answer someday because it's hard to answer.
Okay.
But
hard question.
there's so many people who say that's how they start their day, or that's how they finish their day, is by listening to the podcast. And there's just so much wisdom, not in listening to us. I mean, it's about spending time reminding yourself of what the words of God say and then figuring out how to apply it, right? And that's why we spend a significant amount of time in our podcast every day talking about, not just about the Bible, but actually reading the words of the Bible.
That's great.
That's cool.
Very cool.
Well, good. So we are continuing in Acts. Thank you guys for that. Leave a comment. A bunch of you have left questions. I think those are coming up here pretty soon. We have some questions that are coming up, and Stump the Pastor and mailbag type questions. So
yeah, we're going to do that next week.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
And by the way, I want to take just a moment to remind people also to like us on Facebook.
Yes.
So go on Facebook and just search the Daily Bible Guys. You're going to find it and like it. And then, we'll be sending and communicating through our listeners that way as well.
Oh, and hundreds of you did. We had no followers on Facebook, and suddenly there's hundreds of followers. So now we want to get to thousands, right?
Right,
so,
because it was brand new.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's be clear.
Oh, no, it's because we're
we
amazing.
We had 0 friends.
Well, we had 0 friends, but then all of our friends jumped on board and said,
"That's great."
Yeah, it's great. So we are continuing in Acts chapter 9, and this is where, do you remember yesterday we talked about Saul having this incredible encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus, and then Ananias kind of taking the risk to go and pray over him and, include him into the family of God, brother Saul kind of thing. And now Saul is in Damascus, and it's just going to kind of pick up with what's happening in his life. So it says, Saul stayed with the believers in Damascus for a few days, is what happens there at the end of verse 19. And then it says, and immediately he began preaching about Jesus in the synagogue, saying, he is indeed the Son of God. All who heard him were amazed. Isn't this the same man who caused such devastation among Jesus' followers in Jerusalem? They asked. And didn't he come here to arrest them and take them in chains to the leading priests? Saul's preaching became more and more powerful, and the Jews in Damascus couldn't refute his proofs that Jesus was indeed the Messiah. After a while, some of the Jews plotted together to kill him. They were watching for him day and night at the city gate so they could murder him, but Saul was told about their plot. So during the night, some of the other believers lowered him in a large basket through an opening in the city wall. When Saul arrived in Jerusalem, he tried to meet with the believers, but they were all afraid of him. They did not believe he had truly become a believer. Then Barnabas brought him to the apostles and told them how Saul had seen the Lord on the way to Damascus and how the Lord had spoken to Saul. He also told them that Saul had preached boldly in the name of Jesus in Damascus. So Saul stayed with the apostles and went all around Jerusalem with them, preaching boldly in the name of the Lord. He debated with some Greek-speaking Jews, but they tried to murder him. When the believers heard about this, they took him down to Caesarea and sent him away to Tarsus, his hometown. The church then had peace throughout Judea, Galilee, and Samaria, and it became stronger as the believers lived in the fear of the Lord. And with the encouragement of the Holy Spirit, it also grew in numbers.
Yeah. So this is definitely Paul's transformation.
Yeah.
And
radical transformation.
Yes, and it's so completely understandable why nobody believes him. Mm-hmm. And can you imagine being in Damascus, knowing, just like you referred before, knowing that here comes this persecutor, and then all of a sudden he starts preaching, and it's no wonder why it seems a little cruel and weird, but they want to kill him. Well, think about it. I mean, he would actually be pretty effective as a double agent, right?
Yeah.
Just sort of working their trust and getting in on the inside and trying to gather them up and find out who the Christians are in Damascus, because after all, he lived in Jerusalem, so he knew everybody. He knew political context. Going to a strange city, he didn't really know much. He was cold coming in. Mm-hmm. So what an effective method to actually have gotten to know the Christians through being a double agent. So they plotted to kill him. They lowered him through a wall. And I want to read real quick this note that's in our Life Application Study Bible.
Yeah.
And it says this: at least 3 years elapsed between verse number 22 and verse number 26. After time alone in Arabia, referred to Galatians chapter 1, Saul, or Paul, returned to Damascus and then to Jerusalem. The apostles were reluctant to believe that this former persecutor could have become one of them. Saul escaped to Caesarea, where he caught a ship and returned to Tarsus. So if you continue to read on, there's several different theories about when did this 3-year lapse take place? Mm-hmm. Was it after the lowering of the or was it before, and all these different kind of things. People have debated, but 3 years is a long time for him to grow in the faith.
Yeah.
For him to learn, and I think it's pretty interesting that there's so much time that lapses between cities, and yet we would really never know that unless we cross-referenced everything together and figured it out.
Yeah, well, in Galatians chapter 1, which it references there in that same note, Paul actually makes a claim that Jesus taught him the teachings of Christ during those 3 years. Mm-hmm. So when you talked yesterday about Paul claiming authority as an apostle,
right,
this would be the other thing. So he had an encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus, and then Jesus spent a portion of these 3 years teaching Saul or teaching Paul. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that that's missed in the writings, but we pick in this specific writing between verses 22 and 26, but we pick it up from Galatians that this is what happened during that time. Paul tells us that that's what happened. So that's a really neat thing that Paul was like, he references that Paul was like an apostle that was born out of his time. Right, so all the other apostles were earlier, and then he comes in behind. He wasn't part of the original 12, but God had a special work for him, and that was pretty cool. So he immediately begins to share his faith, And, a lot of people are worried about sharing their faith. They're like, oh, be careful. You might say the wrong words, whatever. You need to get trained really well. And while I think it's important to be in context with other Christians and to have maybe some spiritual mentors that are kind of looking over your shoulder and helping you, that doesn't mean that you should wait until you're fully qualified. Paul wasn't fully qualified to explain everything, but he did begin to tell people his story and what Jesus did for him and how God began to connect the dots in his life. And I think that there's a lot of validity in every Christian at whatever stage you're in. Don't wait until you feel more qualified than you are today. Just go and start sharing the good news of the gospel.
Yeah, so one of my favorite stories to tell, I haven't told it in years, but I was in downtown Nashville. It was about midnight. We were there for a conference, and we were all walking out, and I had parked in a towaway zone, and the tow truck had already lifted up my truck and was actually pulling out and was actually going directly onto the freeway. And I was pretty young back then, in my 20s, and I just sprinted. And I actually caught up with the, he was going really slow. Yeah. Uh-huh. I caught up with the tow truck on the ramp of the freeway and dove and caught the big, huge silver mirror that sticks out really far. I dove and caught that. Of course, he stops and he freaks out, Yeah. And I said, please don't tow my car. And he was trying to explain me directions. And I said, I can't get there. This is before cell phones. And I said, I don't even know what you're talking about. I said, I just want my car. I said, here's $60. I just tried to give him $60. And so finally, I says, I'm in downtown Nashville. I don't know where to go. And he just said, and I finally, let me get to the point. I said to him, I have an idea. How about if I ride with you in the cab and I ride with you, and then when you impound my car, I'll just be there with you. Then I'll pay for it and I'll drive it home. Because I didn't really care. He said, I have to call it in. I have to impound it. It's too late. It's already hooked up. And so finally he looked at me and he goes, are you telling me that you want to ride in the cab with me? And I said, yeah. And he's like, well, I guess so. So I jumped in there. We got about 5 minutes down the road, and he pulls over on the side of the freeway, and he goes, I can't do this. I said, what do you mean? He goes, you're too nice. I said, what do you mean? And he said, all these other people that I encounter, they pull knives on me, they cuss at me, they kick my truck, they want to kill me. He said, you're sitting here in my cab, and you're asking me about my childhood. He said, I can't do this. You're too nice. And I said, well, you know why I'm nice, right? And he said, what? And I said, because I'm a Christian. And I didn't want to tell him a pastor, right? I said, I'm a Christian. And he goes, I've always wondered about that. So I just explained to him about Jesus. I didn't use any fancy verses or anything. I just said, I once was lost and now I'm found. I had a similar search like you. And so he said, what do you need to do? And I said, just pray and trust. So I prayed with him, and he receives Christ right there on the side of the freeway. And all this happened within like 20 minutes, right? I mean, it was just right as soon as we had left. And so he comes back out and he lowers my car and he says, here, you can just have your car back. And I said, man, I encouraged him to get involved in a church and everything like this. So I turned around on the freeway and I'd come back out, and my buddies who rode with me were walking all the way up the street because there's one thoroughway in Nashville where all the hotels are. And we were down and it was at least 5 miles up, and they were still walking. So I turned around and I'd driven up the street, and I saw them, and they looked at me and they go, oh, that's so funny. They said, how much did it cost you? And I said, it was free. And they said, shut up. It wasn't free. They're like, how did you manage that? And I said, well, I led them to Christ.
Yeah, that's one way to do it.
That's right. And they're both youth pastors, and they're like, you did not.
Yeah, yeah.
And I said, yeah, I did.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah. So all that to say, all I really had to know in that story was, hey, you're nice. Well, why my life is different because I'm a Christian. Mm-hmm. That's it. Hey, why do you have so much peace? Why do you run your marriage the way that you do? How could you possibly be so happy? Why do you act the way you do? Why do you give generously? People ask you these things all the time, and they should. If you're living in such a way,
right.
And you just answer and say, well, because, and then you just give them a very simple explanation. Because before Christ, I was this way. After Christ, I'm this way.
I think that the idea of sharing the good news, because there's God's story and there's your story, right? Mm-hmm. So your story. You have just have to get better at telling God's story and helping make those connect. But this is why you need other believers. This is why you need to be constantly studying God's word and taking classes on evangelism and all those kinds of things so you can get better at it. Paul, certainly, he's staying with believers in Damascus, verse 19 says. It says that he's connecting to Barnabas. Barnabas takes him to the apostles, so he's staying engaged with it. He's not just some kind of Lone Ranger guy going off and doing his own ministry, 6 minutes after he trusts Jesus. He is getting trained by some of the best, but he's not shy about sharing what he does know. And I think that this is a really important differentiation for a lot of Christians, especially if you grew up in a religious world, but you're just now really dialing into your faith. And that's this. Don't wait around to eventually be qualified to do what God has already told you to do. Instead, start doing it and God will qualify you. That's really what happens. Paul immediately begins to go, let me see, I was a Pharisee. I'm kind of an expert in religious law. I know this Jesus guy. He starts connecting the dots. Let me tell you my story. And he's using what he's got to kind of share. So he doesn't wait until finally God says, Paul's an apostle. Listen to him. He doesn't do that.
Right.
He doesn't wait until Barnabas and the rest of the apostles go, wow, this guy's impressive. He just starts sharing the gospel. He starts doing what he's supposed to do. And then God elevates him into the position that he needed to have. And I think too many Christians wait, and they wait till, if I take one more class, that's when I'm going to share the gospel with my friend. If I read one more book or listen to one more podcast, that's when I'm finally going to be qualified. If I can just get rid of this one bad habit, that's when I'm finally going to share the gospel with my brother. And it's exactly the opposite. You start doing what God says to do, and then God will qualify you as you move forward. And this is what happens with them. The other thing I want to highlight is, and I know that this is true for you because I've heard you talk about it too, how many times in your life has God brought very strategic allies to continue to move your ministry forward and up, right? So it was Ananias at first. If it hadn't been Ananias, no Christians would have touched this guy, right? And it had to be Jesus go, I want you to go talk to Saul because nobody's going to approach him. And then the next one is Barnabas.
Yeah.
Barnabas steps in, and Barnabas was a prominent man.
And what's so funny is they didn't give a reason why Barnabas did this.
No.
But Barnabas must have been completely convinced, and he really became the ally for Paul.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but chronologically, all the way through the book of Acts, when it refers to both of them, it lists them as Barnabas and Saul, Barnabas and Saul, Barnabas and Saul. And then later on, as you continue to read, it goes from Barnabas and Saul to Barnabas and Paul,
Right.
which indicates that his reputation now has been changed.
Right.
Because people are starting to know him as Paul. He had to change his name because he was so bad before.
Right.
He had, obviously, right? People are wanting to murder him, right?
Yeah.
So he decides to change his name.
He was so prominent, he didn't even need a last name.
right.
Right.
Of Tarsus.
Yeah, that's right. They knew which Saul he was talking about. Yeah.
So it went from Barnabas and Saul to Barnabas and Paul. And then if you continue to read chronologically throughout the book of Acts, then it becomes Paul and Barnabas, Paul and Barnabas, Paul and Barnabas, Paul and Barnabas. And then it says Paul and his friends.
Right.
So Barnabas just sort of fades out.
Right.
And then it's just ends up just being, after that, Paul, because Barnabas has, left Paul and Paul is now solo. So all of that to say, for years, Barnabas was the catalyst who brought Paul to the disciples even.
Yeah.
He brought them to disciples so that Paul can actually, be introduced to those who walked with Jesus, to Peter especially, and to introduce them. And I think that it's, really helpful to highlight Barnabas because there are so many people in our ministries and in our lives who don't necessarily get the spotlight.
Right.
But yet you think about that. Think about all the people in your life. They're so critical, fundamental, essential to so many great things. And they're the behind the scenes type of people.
Right. It seems like the apostles are somewhat skeptical multiple times of Paul. You'll see this over the next couple of chapters here, where they're not totally dialed into trusting him. And it's Barnabas who bridges the gap all the time.
Yeah.
If it hadn't been for Barnabas, maybe we would have never heard of Paul, right? Maybe, God was going to do what God was going to do, but God chose to use Barnabas. If it hadn't been Barnabas, who was going to step up and defend Paul and put him in the place that God had for him? And so the Barnabases in life, I think there's far more Barnabases than there are Pauls. And thank God for them. The kingdom of God is moving forward today on the backs and on the shoulders of men and women that we don't even know their names, right? You and I, we've been in places. We were in Tanzania together. We were in different places where we've seen these Christians that are just doing incredible works of God, but they don't have a book deal. They're not speaking at some big conference. They don't have the most amazing YouTube channel, right? They don't have a whole team of TikTok people making sure that all their stuff is really, really cool. They're just serving God in quiet humility, and that's what Christianity is really about. It's not about the celebrities. We get enamored by the celebrities, but it's not the celebrities really.
Right.
It's the Barnabases of the world that make, of the Christian world, that really are making the things move forward. And so if that's your ministry, if you're trying to figure out what your ministry is and God hasn't given you an upfront ministry, take on the role of Barnabas. Be this helper. Be this godly man, this godly woman who says, I'm going to do whatever it takes to lift up others. And then here we are 2,000 years later talking about Barnabas.
Right. And so my college professor talked about Barnabas like the harmony. And so here's what he did: is he played something, and back then it was on cassette tape. Right? I think it was like 1989. I went to Bible college. And he played cassette tape, and he played this like a violin, and it was a beautiful melody. And he said, and it's wonderful. He says, but listen to it now again. And then he played it with a harmony. And he said, you don't focus on the harmony, but the harmony enhances the melody. And then the comment that he made about Barnabas was, he said, it takes more grace than one can tell to play the second fiddle well. And so it really is, he deserves a lot of credit for that role, because not everybody can, do all of that work and be so critical and yet not get the spotlight.
Yeah. And then I think we'd be remiss if we don't mention, and it says here in the Life Application Study Bible, which we love, the note for 29 through 30 says, in these short sentences, we can see two characteristics of Saul and Paul. Even as a new believer in Christ, he was bold and he stirred up controversy, and these would characterize Saul's ministry for the rest of his life.
That's hilarious.
2 times in the course of just a couple things, they're trying to kill him already. They're trying to kill him, right? So, don't be shocked. Jesus said they're going to hate you because they hated me first. And don't be surprised by that. But God carried him through his ministry. You will not die until the day that it was your appointment already. So you're not going to die early. You're not going to die late. It's going to be right on time. So between here and there, you're invincible. Just go forward with Jesus, and don't be afraid of stirring up a little bit of controversy for Christ's sake.
Okay, so that's probably a good place to wrap up. So tune in next time, tomorrow, when somebody raises somebody else from the dead who makes draperies.
Oh, wow. Well, that makes it very exciting. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow.